Hello everyone. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Jonathan. In our previous video part 3, we have covered the output devices. For today's video, we will be covering part 4 of the computer fundamentals. The highlights of the part 4 will be the Central Processing Unit (CPU). Let's go ahead and join with me. And please don't forget to subscribe the JBV tutorial and hit the bell so won't miss of my new videos. What is Central Processing Unit (CPU)? A central processing unit is also called a processor, central processor, or microprocessor. It carries out all the important functions of a computer. It receives instructions from both the hardware and active software and produces output accordingly. It stores all important programs like operating systems and application software. CPU also helps input and output devices to communicate with each other. Owing to these features of CPU, it is often referred to as the brain of the computer. CPU itself has the following three components. Memory or storage unit. It is called Random Access Memory (RAM). It temporarily stores data, programs, and intermediate and final results of processing. So, it acts as a temporary storage area that holds the data temporarily, which is used to run the computer. Control unit. It is the circuitry in the control unit, which makes use of electrical signals to instruct the computer system for executing already stored instructions. It takes instructions from memory and then decodes and executes these instructions. So, it controls and coordinates the functioning of all parts of the computer. The control unit's main task is to maintain and regulate the flow of information across the processor. It does not take part in processing and storing data. ALU, Arithmetic Logic Unit. It is the arithmetic logic unit, which performs arithmetic and logical functions. Arithmetic functions include addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and comparisons. Logical functions mainly include selecting, comparing, and merging the data. A CPU may contain more than one ALU. Furthermore, ALUs can be used for maintaining timers that help run the computer. Where is CPU located in the motherboard? In a computer, the CPU is found at the heart of the system, plugged into the motherboard. You wouldn't be able to see it if you took the side panel off your desktop PC, as it will be hidden under a cooling fan. A CPU is a powerful component, and would get very hot without proper cooling. In below photos, this is where the CPU located in the motherboard. CPU already on the motherboard. CPU under the cooling fan. What is CPU clock speed? In general, a higher clock speed means a faster CPU. However, many other factors come into play. Your CPU processes many instructions, low-level calculations like arithmetic, from different programs every second. The clock speed measures the number of cycles your CPU executes per second, measured in GHz, gigahertz. A cycle is technically a pulse synchronized by an internal oscillator, but for our purposes, they're a basic unit that helps understand a CPU's speed. During each cycle, billions of transistors within the processor open and close. A CPU with a clock speed of 3.2 GHz executes 3.2 billion cycles per second. Older CPUs had speeds measured in megahertz, or millions of cycles per second. Sometimes, multiple instructions are completed in a single clock cycle. In other cases, one instruction might be handled over multiple clock cycles. Since different CPU designs handle instructions differently, it's best to compare clock speeds within the same CPU brand and generation. What are the popular types of CPU? Single core, dual core, quad core, Hexa Core, OctaCore, DecaCore. Single core CPU. Single core is the oldest type of computer CPU, which was used in the 1970s. It has only one core to process different operations. It can start only one operation at a time, the CPU switches back and forth between different sets of data streams when more than one program runs. So, it is not suitable for multitasking as the performance will be reduced if more than one application runs. The performance of these CPUs is mainly dependent on the clock speed. It is still used in various devices, such as smartphones. Dual-core CPU. As the name suggests, dual-core CPU contains two cores in a single integrated circuit, IC. Although each core has its own controller and cache, they are linked together to work as a single unit and thus can perform faster than the single-core processors, and can handle multitasking more efficiently than single-core processors. Quad-core CPU. This type of CPU comes with two dual-core processors in one integrated circuit, IC, or chip. So, a quad-core processor is a chip that contains four independent units called cores. These cores read and execute instructions of CPU. The cores can run multiple instructions simultaneously, thereby increases the overall speed for programs that are compatible with parallel processing. Quad-core CPU uses a technology that allows four independent processing units, cores, to run in parallel on a single chip. Thus, by integrating multiple cores in a single CPU, higher performance can be generated without boosting the clock speed. However, the performance increases only when the computer's software supports multiprocessing. The software which supports multiprocessing divides the processing load between multiple processors, instead of using one processor at a time. Hexa Core CPU. It is another multiple-core processor, which is available with 6 cores, and can execute the task which works rapidly than the quad-core and dual-core processors. For users of the personal computer, the processors of Hexa-Core is simple, and now the Intel is launched with Inter-Core i7 in 2010 with Hexa-Core processor. But here the users of smartphones use only quad-core and dual-core processors. Nowadays, smartphones are available with Hexa-Core processors. OctaCore CPU. The dual-core is built with 2 cores, for cores are built in quad-core. Hexa comes with 6 cores, where the Octa processors are developed with 8 independent cores, to execute an effective task that is efficient and even acts rapidly than quad-core processors. Trending octa-core processors comprises of a dual set of quad-core processors that divides different activities between the various types. Many times, the minimum powered core sets are employed to produce advanced tasks. If there is any emergency or requirement, the rapid 4 sets of cores will be kicked in. In precise, the octa-core is perfectly defined with dual-code core, and adjusted accordingly to give the effective performance. DecaCore CPU. The processor with double core comprises 2 cores, 4 cores are available with quad cores, 6 cores are available in hexacore processors. DecaCore is available with 10 independent systems that are deployed to execute and manage the task that is successful than other processors that are developed until now. Owning a PC or any device made with a DecaCore processor is the best option. It is faster than other processors and very successful in multitasking. DecaCore processors are trending with its advanced features. Most of the smartphones are now available with DecaCore processors, with low cost, and never become outdated. Surely, most gadgets in the market are updated with new processors to give more useful purposes to people. History of CPU. Some of the important events in the development of CPU since its invention till date are as follows. In 1823, Baron Johannes Jacob Berzelius discovered silicon, that is the main component of CPU till date. In 1903, Nikola Tesla got gates or switches patented, which are electrical logic circuits. In December 1947, John Bardeen, William Shockley, and Walter Brattain invented the first transistor at the Bell Laboratories and got it patented in 1948. In 1958, the first working integrated circuit was developed by Robert Noyce and Jack Kilby. In 1960, IBM established the first mass production facility for transistors in New York. In 1968, Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore founded Intel Corporation. AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, was founded in May 1969. In 1971, Intel introduced the first microprocessor, the Intel 4004 with the help of Ted Hoff. In 1972, Intel introduced the 8008 processor. In 1976, Intel 8086 was introduced, and in June 1979, Intel 8088 was released. In 1979, a 16/32-bit processor, the Motorola 68000, was released. Later, it was used as a processor for the Apple Macintosh and Amiga computers. In 1987, Sun introduced the SPARC processor. In March 1991, AMD introduced the AM386 microprocessor family. In March 1993, Intel released the Pentium processor. In 1995, Cyrix introduced the CX5X86 processor to give competition to Intel Pentium processors. In January 1999, Intel introduced the Celeron 366 MHz and 400 MHz processors. In April 2005, AMD introduced its first dual-core processor. In 2006, Intel introduced the Core 2 Duo processor. In 2007, Intel introduced different types of Core 2 Quad processors. In April 2008, Intel introduced the first series of Intel Atom processors, the Z5XX series. They were single-core processors with a 200 MHz GPU. In September 2009, Intel released the first Core i5 desktop processor with 4 cores. In January 2010, Intel released many processors such as Core 2 Quad processor Q9500, first Core i3 and i5 mobile processors, first Core i3 and i5 desktop processors. In the same year in July, it released the first Core i7 desktop processor with 6 cores. In June 2017, Intel introduced the first Core i9 desktop processor. In April 2018, Intel released the first Core i9 mobile processor. That will be it for today's video, guys. In our next video for the part 5 we will covering the computer hardware. Thank you everyone and hope to see you again. Goodbye.